Hello, EHS. It is Miss Cicco. I wanted to make this video first and foremost to tell you that I love you all. I miss you so much, sending you so much love from a distance. I can't wait until we can see each other again. But until then, I wanted to share a little bit about a really exciting thing that is happening right now that you can help your family participate in. A quick but really important activity, and that is, drumroll please, the decennial census. Woohoo! It is census time. Census time. Woohoo! What is a decennial census? Well, let's break it down. A census is a federal government survey that they send out to every person living in America that is intended to count them and receive some basic information. So some types of questions that you might see on the survey are who lives in your home, how old each person that lives in the home is, if each person is of Hispanic, Latin, or Spanish origin. They might ask a race question. They might also ask what type of home you live in, like if you live in a house, an apartment, or a mobile home, etc. That's just an example of questions you might see on a census. What is decennial? Well, let's break it down. We know dec or deca means 10, and we know that from words like decimal, where we move over every multiple of 10, or deca, like decade, like 10 years. Ennial is a suffix or a word ending that means yearly or every year. So therefore, decennial means it happens every 10 years. So the census happens every 10 years. It is 2020, which means it's time for another census. Alert, 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 alert. An adult should fill out the census. So whether they fill it out online or on paper or a person that comes in and asks you questions, all questions should be filled out by an adult. I want to teach you about the census because you could help your family by finding this letter in the mail, opening it for them, helping them log on to the website, advising them on what types of answers we might be able to put. But when actually filling out the questions, it should be filled out by an adult. But I want you to know what it is and why it's important. So the census is mentioned in the US Constitution. Really briefly, it says representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers. So one of the main reasons we do the census is for something called apportionment. It really just means equal representation for all. It's to make sure that each representative that gets sent to the US government is representing the same amount of people. So if one state is very highly populated, they might want to send more representatives than a less populated state. So let's say, for example, you live in the Bronx. The Bronx does not just send one person to DC to represent that district. The Bronx actually makes up 4 different congressional districts. That means that 4 separate people go to DC to represent the Bronx. That is because the Bronx is very highly populated, right? If only one person went, they would be representing a lot of people that they might not be able to keep all of their needs in check. So because the Bronx is highly populated, they actually send 4 separate people to the US Congress, to the House of Representatives, to DC to represent their district. Here is a picture of all the representatives in the House of Representatives that meet in DC and a breakdown of which state sends how many representatives. So for example, if we look over at the yellow portion, this state sends the most, and that state is California. That's because California has the most amount of people. So they need the most amount of people to be sent in order to represent the same amount of people per person. The second biggest we see is actually Texas. Those red dots right there represent Texas because it is the second highest populated state. And we see those purple dots over there, that is New York. So we send the 4th most amount of representatives because we have the 4th highest population in our state. And then we get smaller and smaller and smaller as the population of the states gets smaller. So the census, once they figure out how many people live in each area, that actually determines how much funding, how much money each area gets. So if the government knows that more people live in an area, they would send them more money for things such as highways or road repair, right? Infrastructure, building buildings, bridges, roads. There's potholes in the roads. That money might be going to paving it over so it's nice and clean when you drive across it, or to adding bike lanes, things like that. If they know more people live there, they might want to give more money for that. In addition, they also give money for parks. So the government could decide they want for every 1,000 or 5,000 people that live in an area, they want a park. So if they get the data back from the census and they realize, wow, we have a lot of people who now live in this area, but we don't have any parks, that might give some money so that we can build a park. Some of the funding also goes to healthcare. So there's different government programs that give money to people for healthcare, including funding for hospitals and doctors and health insurance for different people. All of that money is dependent on how many people live in that area and the information they get from the census. So the money that goes to our highways, our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure, our parks, our healthcare is all that money that we get is determined by the census data. So it's super important. The census data also helps small businesses. So if you're opening a small business, let's say you're opening a bodega like this one that President Obama is in, you might want to know how many people live in your area or in the area next door, a few blocks away, because that might help you make decisions as to where you might want to expand to new stores. You also get some extra information that might help you figure out what your customers might want out of your business. If you have all the information from the census based on just a few questions that people fill out on their survey. Here's what we as mathematicians can do with the data. So once every person who lives in America fills out this survey of just a few questions, the Census Bureau actually gets a ton of information, like so much information they have to figure out what to do with it. That's where math comes in handy. So with math, we can do things like make a bar graph. So for example, we see that from the data collected from a census, they created a bar graph showing the top 5 states that have the most amount of Hispanic-owned firms. First being California, and here we are in New York, being the 4th most. We can make a bar graph. We can make a really cool infographic like this one over here. A lot of math goes into the algorithm and how you can sort and organize all of the data and numbers that you get from the survey to make something really cool like this. Here is another super cool infographic that through math and data science, we can make a picture that represents all the information collected from the census. We can also make a graph showing women's earnings. So what we see is that they took the census data and made a list of the occupations that are most, the highest percentage within the occupation group, meaning like the highest amount of hairstylists are actually women. They listed all those occupations and of course listed women's earnings as a percentage of men's earnings, which is fairly low. We can also use the census data to make an even more detailed bar graph that we see here. Based on the age and ethnicity questions that we see showing in the census, we can actually build things like this that show exactly where the most amount of people that live in, how old most amount of people who live in America are. And we see that the most amount of people are actually 16 to 44. And within each age bracket, we can see what the racial makeup of those age brackets are. So there's 3 ways to complete the census. The first way to complete the census is online. So the first thing you'll get in the mail is a form like this. It is from the Census Bureau. It says Census 2020. Back it says Census 2020. And this form is actually leads you to online. So it tells you what the website is that you go to. You can search in your mail to see if you've received this. You should have received this by now. I've actually received 2 in the mail, so even if you miss the first one, they might send you another one. It's just a 1-page sheet that gives you a code, right? This online code is kind of like your password to log in to the census website, and then you would fill out all those questions online. You could fill out the census on a phone, on a tablet, or on a computer, or any other way that you access the internet. If for whatever reason you don't have access to the internet, that doesn't mean that your family cannot fill out the census. they will figure out, the Census Bureau will figure out that you did not fill out the form online, and they'll send you another piece of paper in the mail, or the envelope would look something like this, but it's actually thicker because it's a mailed paper form, which means that you can take out a pen and fill out the answers on the paper being sent to you. And you can mail it back to the Census Bureau by doing that. A third way that you might fill out the census is that someone knocks on your door and asks you the questions. They have like a clipboard and they ask you the questions. This is really rare for this to happen. I think only like 5% of all Americans get someone knock on their door and a census taker asks them questions in person, but it could happen to you. So I want you to know what it means and that it's a possibility. And they would only do that if they realize that you didn't fill out the online or mailed paper form. One of the questions I wanted to tell you about was a new question that we see on the 2020 census that has not been seen on previous censi, has never been seen on a previous census. And that is this question. The question says, is this person Spanish, Hispanic, or Latino? This is to separate this question from the race question, because people identify ethnicity and race differently. So you would fill this out as best as you identify. However you identify is how you would answer this question. If you most strongly identify as being Mexican, you would check yes, Mexican. I believe for this question, you can only check one. So if you identify as someone who is mixed, both Puerto Rican and Mexican descent, you might want to click yes, other, and fill that in the group where they offer the spaces. But I believe for this one, you can only select one. So every single person answers this question, whether they identify or not with these categorizations. If they didn't, they would just select no. And then moving on to the race question. So this question is different from the Latin, Spanish, or Hispanic heritage question. This is because people can identify differently with ethnicity or race. So the form is actually designed to give you more options rather than less. They don't want to put you into a bucket that you wouldn't necessarily agree with. So on the race question, they give you lots of different options, as you can see here. And the thing that's different about the race question is you can actually select all that apply to you. So if you identify as someone who's biracial, you could select the two races that are bi or triracial. You would select all the races that you would most closely identify with. You can also select some other race if you feel more comfortable. If you feel like your race is not written into any of these boxes, you can just select some other race and fill in the race below. I will say that for American Indian or Alaska Native, you could select that if your family most closely identifies with any indigenous people in North, Central, or South America. So if your family has the closest ties to the indigenous people of North, South, or Central America, you can select American Indian because that falls in all of the Americas. Just wanted to tell you that, but however you feel comfortable doing this, I just want you to know that you could select more than one race here, however you best identify yourself. Finally, I wanted to end with some jokes. So here are some cheesy census jokes I wanted to share with you. Obviously, they have nothing on Daniel. He is the king, the baron, of course. How does Peter Parker keep track of the number of arachnids in his neighborhood? He uses his Spidey senses. Okay. I recently saw a sign that said 3 out of every 4 people make up 75% of the population. And I thought, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And finally, I wanted to show you this hilarious video that I found that, let's see if I can find it. This is a hilarious video that I found, which is like an advertisement for the census, but it was 40 years ago. So the census 40 years ago, 1980, 40 years ago, 4 censi ago, made this hilarious video, and I wanted to show it to you guys because I thought it was so great. Okay.
80 million mailboxes across the USA. The census is a-coming to help us plan the way, to show us where we're going so that we can understand what's needed documentation. Help show where funds are needed for jobs, schools, healthcare, and more. Answer the 1980 census. And all your answers are kept confidential by law. Can we count on you? You can count on me. Can we count on you? You can count on me.
Whoa, even Mickey fills out the census. Who knew? Well, EHS, I hope you really learned something about the decennial census. Look for this in the mail, and I hope that you and your family will have your vote counted because everyone in this country counts. Make sure you fill out the census, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye.